Welcome back to Christian World News. Well, if your church sings worship music, chances are there are a few tunes from Hillsong on the congregation's weekly list. The Australian church has provided the soundtrack for churches around the world for many, many years. Last week, church leadership announced plans to form its own denomination, pulling away from Australia's largest Pentecostal denomination. Pastor Brian Houston says with Hillsong's growth around the world, it needs to be able to credential its own pastors and structure the church in a way crucial to the progress of its mission. CBN's Ephraim Graham sat down with Houston in Studio 5 to talk about the ups and downs of living, loving, and leading.
The power of love.
More than 20,000 people attend services at Hillsong Church on any given Sunday, with campuses in Sydney, Kiev, Moscow, New York City, London, Cape Town, Paris, and so many more. And leading the worldwide flock is global pastor Brian Houston, who shares some of the journey in his book, Live, Love, Lead. Why this book? What made you want to write this book?
Well, I think the book's been in my heart for a long time. I have been pastoring for 32 years, same church, 40 years, preaching and ministering, and I just felt like there was a lot in me I wanted to use to help other people, equip other people. So the timing right now just seemed to be the right time. I had the time to actually write the book, and so Live, Love, Lead, that's where I am.
Houston and his wife Bobby first started Hillsong in 1983, meeting in a school hall and then a warehouse with only 45 members. It grew to 900 people in 4 years and continues to multiply. This church isn't the church you started 40 years ago.
That's for sure. No, we started in a little school hall in the outer suburbs of Sydney. In those days, it was like green fields where we were, and we were in a small hall, as I say, and it is an amazing story. I mean, it's a miracle.
Did you envision this? I remember reading, and you and your wife dating in a car that backs down into someone's house, essentially, because you forget to put it in park. Is this what you guys talked about all those years ago?
We really could not have imagined all that God has done. We both, my wife and I, both grew up in New Zealand. The story you're talking about in the book is our neighbour who used to go to the tiny little Assemblies of God church we went to, had a very steep drive, and so we were parked at the top of their drive and just talking about the future and planning, and yeah, you got to read the book to see the rest. But I've got to tell you that we did have in our heart to serve God and to believe to do something significant, but the grace of God has been something we could never have perceived.
What's been the toughest part of those 40 years for you?
Well, I talk in the book about the worst day of my life. I was 45, it was in 1999. My father was my absolute hero. In fact, he was one of my great inspirations in terms of what I do today. And at 45, one of the guys who works for me came into my office, and we went through our normal list of things to talk about. And at the end, he said, there's just one more thing. And so the way he said it, the tone, I knew something was wrong. And he told me that we'd had a complaint come in that many years before that, probably in the 1970s, that my father had abused a young man. So, yeah, I mean, you couldn't hit me with worse news. It sort of hit me in layers. And so I had to confront my own father and ask him about that. So that definitely is the worst day of my life.
How did that resolve itself? I can't even imagine navigating that.
I don't know whether it has resolved itself as such. My father now has been dead for over 10 years, but the ramifications of that are still playing out right now.
What lessons did God allow that to teach you?
You know, one thing I do know is it wasn't me. I didn't do anything wrong. It was my father. And, you know, in the world we live, there's some people who would love to try and frame me by my father's sin. But I refuse to let that happen. But I guess it helped me to realise that everyone has their issues, has their battle, whatever that is. And that's why I think everyone is a perfect recipient for the gospel of Jesus, the grace of God.
Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders.
And with more than 40 recordings to their credit, music is a Hillsong signature. Their contemporary Christian praise songs are the Sunday soundtrack for churches around the world.
When many people think of Hillsong before they even think of the church and your ministry now, the music is so far-reaching. What do you think? I mean, are you a musician? What do you? Why
I was the church drummer when I was a teenager. But compared with the people today, no, I'm not a musician. But I always had a heart to pastor the kind of church that was an inspiration to churches. I'm a great believer in the potential of the church, and I mean the local church. And so I always kind of wanted to have a church where we wrote and sung songs that helped the church. And so it's an amazing thing because been through various personalities over all these years, but really from the start, it seems the songs from our church struck a chord with people, firstly in Australia, obviously, and then globally. And it's been a miracle story. Someone once said to me, Brian, you realise this is only a season. They're talking about the impact of the worship from Hillsong. And I agree, it's only a season, but so far it's been a very long season.
Finally this week, First Lady Melania Trump made her first international trip without the president, visiting African nations including Ghana, Malawi, Kenya, and Egypt. Mrs. Trump landed in Ghana for the first stop of her week-long visit. Part of the goal of her trip is to promote her Be Best initiative around the world, and it was her first time to Africa. Good for her. Well, thanks for joining us this week. From all of us here at Christian World News, until next week, goodbye, and as always, God bless you.